Jesus is Horus 2.0. Okay, now that I've got your attention. I'm sure you're well aware of the number of videos that have been posted regarding the supposed parallels between the life of Horus and the life of Jesus. I thought I'd take a look at these, and in the nature of true skepticism, I'd look at the evidence behind them and see what came about. Well, the first two questions that most people ask are the resurrection of Horus and the virgin birth. Since the birth became before the resurrection, obviously, I'm going to take a look at the birth first. So, was Horus truly a virgin birth? Well, I'll give you a bit of background here. Um, Horus is the son of Osiris in Egyptian mythology. And Osiris is killed by Set, his brother. And Osiris is cut into a number of pieces scattered throughout Egypt. Isis, his wife, comes along, pieces him together again, reanimates his corpse. They do their thing, and Horus is conceived. And this is the story that most people nowadays are familiar with. It is the original Egyptian story. And so there are two sides to the debate nowadays where a lot of people will say, well, it was a reanimated corpse that conceived Horus, so therefore he didn't really have a living father. He didn't know. He was it was kind of an immaculate conception, I guess. There was magic involved, all these things. People kind of make a cop-out excuse. And then, and that's the skeptic's way. And then there's the other side. Usually the Christians are saying, well, it was a passionate birth, or a passionate conception, and so it was not immaculate conception. However, both sides kind of missed the point, because there's actually a story that the Romans, the story I just said, the Romans would not have been familiar with at all. They would have been familiar with what Plutarch said about the matter. You see, Plutarch was the Greek dude who wrote up all this Egyptian mythology, and the Romans really loved him. So the Romans would have been familiar with his work. And Plutarch made a really interesting account. You see, there is some discrepancy in the numbers involved. Specifically, the number of pieces that Osiris was chopped into. The original Egyptian myths had 13 pieces representing to the Egyptians the 13 number of full moons in a single year. Plutarch and the Greeks happened to like, for some reason, the number of phases, 14, the number of phases between the moon's shining and its waning. And I don't particularly know why. All I know is that they wanted to make the number of pieces of Osiris represent that. So they had 14 pieces rather than the 13 of Egyptian mythology. So Plutarch, he really had to balance these two off to satisfy the Greeks. So he decided that Osiris was originally cut into 14 pieces, and Isis found 13. What was the missing piece? You guessed it, it was the penis, which was cast into the Nile and devoured by the Lepidodus fish, or alternatively the Phagris and the Oxyrhynchus fish. So that's what the story that the Romans would have been familiar with. The way that Horus was conceived in this account, obviously Osiris was lacking a penis, was that Isis took the form of a bird and flew around Osiris's body several times, and thus Horus was conceived somehow. It's a very strange account, but very Plutarch-like. So the Romans would have been familiar with this account in which Horus was indeed an immaculate conception, very much so. In fact, there's another little interesting tidbit about his conception. The pyramid texts read that Isis conceiveth in the form of the star Septet. Horus Sept issueth from thee in the form of Horus, dweller in the star Sept. Now this is an interesting thing, because the star Septet, or also called Sothis to the Egyptians, was what we call Sirius today. And it was really interesting to the Egyptians. Anubis was, I believe he was born into the star as well, or he represented the star. They had a lot of gods that really were born into this and represented Sirius. So we have an interesting star that heralds the birth of this god. And this is precisely what we see in the Jesus accounts. In fact, there are a lot of astronomers today who claim that Sirius was the star that Jesus saw. This tends to be the prevailing opinion. So we have an interesting star that heralds the birth of both. We seem to be on the right track. The next bit that people often get all huffy about is the resurrection of Horus. The reason they get huffy about this is because you can't find it. I should say, you can't find it in the way that the skeptics like to claim. Skeptics like to claim a lot of bullshit, really. And I'm sad for this because I am a skeptic myself. But a lot of people are claiming that Horus was crucified, that he was hung on a tree between two thieves, that he was, buried in the place called the skull, much like Jesus. There's a lot of different accounts, but they're not true, at least not that I can find. You see, Horus was the pharaoh. He wasn't going to be crucified. He did nothing that would make him crucified. And there is no mythology that I've ever found that makes him crucified, and all of these sites seem to not cite their sources, which is really a bother because Horus was a resurrection deity. Very much so. In fact, he was a resurrection deity as soon as he was born, pretty much. His uncle Set, the one who killed Osiris, remember, sent out a scorpion to kill Horus, which succeeded in its efforts, because Set considered Horus to be kind of a threat to the throne. In fact, he would be. He would battle Set for a number of years and finally win the throne and become the pharaoh of Egypt, the true pharaoh of Egypt. So Set was the pharaoh at this time. He wasn't the true pharaoh, quote unquote, because he wasn't, he wasn't there by royal descent. He was the brother of Cyrus, not the son. Horus was there rightfully. He became the rightful pharaoh of Egypt. So the current ruler of the lands sought to assassinate the up-and-coming ruler of the lands. And this is something that we also see in the Jesus myths with Herod and Jesus. Herod wanting to assassinate Jesus. Except in the case of Jesus, Jesus fled and escaped. Isis originally fled with Horus as well. She, hid him for a while. But the fact of the matter is that he was still killed. A scorpion came and stung and killed the infant Horus. Isis then wailed and wailed and lamented over the death of her son so loudly that it was heard by the almighty Osiris Re, where Osiris has become the basically he has become the supreme deity now, along with Re, is what many consider to be his father. Many Egyptians consider him to be his father. So Osiris Re, the sun god and judge of the afterlife, he overhears that his son has been killed, and so he stops the sun in its sky. The very course of nature, he stops. He has never done this before. He never does this afterwards. But he stops the sun in its sky, and he sends down Thoth, this great, sorcerer god. He sends him down to raise his son from the dead. And this I find very interesting, because now we have an almighty God, the father of Horus, stopping the course of nature in bemoanment of his son's death and resurrecting his son to life again. And this appeared once again in the Jesus myths with God, Jesus' father, stopping or causing an earthquake. And we also find that there is sudden darkness, that we once again have the sun vanishing, in this case not stopping in the sky necessarily, but just stopping for 3 days and vanishing from sight, basically, and we have utter darkness. And we have a similar physical phenomenon that is expressing the grief of the Almighty. So I find this very interesting. Horus of Resurrection, as we can clearly see. This was taken, by the way, from the Metternich Stela, which is an Egyptian account of all things, incantations against poisons, venoms, and such. So this is in the section about scorpions. So they made the story in order to provide an incantation against scorpions. If you recite the story, you'll be, able to heal from a scorpion wound. I would like to leave off this section with a quote from William Budge, who's a primary Egyptologist and translator of Egyptian hieroglyphs. He says that ultimately the nature myth was forgotten, and the fight between the